Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining our Kind Korero section. I'll open us up with a karakia, also known as the loto in Tongan. So ke tau loto e klele mo te hanga atu ake loto honga ia koe uhi ke whawhitai me whamalo I o whātatai mai ki mau tolu he awhakoloko e ni. Amana ki whakahoke mau polokalama mo kore ke kāmu ki mau tolu ke whaki mai poto mo ilo e fua ake mau ngahi patungi a sia vai ngahi me te ki ake mau lea ake loto pai wai ko e ni e ke toki whakakakato mai me langina. Amen. Malo lele everyone, my name is Sulieti Filimoihala. I am on the ANZIA board and it is such an honor to be able to host and have you guys join our Kind Korero session. Today we have our presenters Anna and Nan. So Anna is an associate professor in public health and policy in the School of Health at Te Herenga Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. For the last 8 years, Anna has led the evaluation of health families in New Zealand. Nan Wahipehana has more than 15 years experience in designing, leading and managing evaluation. She has a wealth of public sector knowledge and is widely recognized for her adeptness in managing complex relationships. So it is lovely to have you both join us today. I'll pass it on to you both. Malo Alpito.
Tēnā koutou katoa, mihi mai oha kia koutou I tai mai I te ahiahi nei kia whakarongo ki tēnei aromatawai arotake hoki. Tēnā koutou, kia ora no tātou. It's a real privilege to be able to share this work with those of you who have joined us today. It's been my privilege to walk alongside Anna for the last 8 years, and we've got another nearly 2.5, 3 years to go. So by the time this round of evaluation is completed, we'll have been working together for nearly 11 years. So we like to think we know one another well, our strengths, but also the things that are really important to each of us. So I've been involved since the outset, and just in the last 3 to 5 years have been co-leading with Anna. So we've got a lot to get through. There's been 7 years of evaluation work, and we want to leave a lot of time for questions. So thank you for coming, and feel free to also put some questions in the chat if that's the way to, if you've got some. We'll probably take questions at the end, and we think we're aiming for something like 20-25 minutes of kōrero, and then leaving a good half an hour for actually for questions. And I'll throw to you, Anna. Kia ora.
Kia ora Nan. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Anna Matheson, tōku ingoa no Te Herenga Waka ahau. So I'm based at the School of Health at Victoria University. And that's right. And I like to hear at the beginning there, Nan, that you're expert at managing complex relationships because I think that this is what this 8 years has been mostly about in all sorts of different ways. And that's right. It's been so nice to walk alongside you for that time as well, Nan. So I'm not an expert evaluator. I guess that's one thing, especially in this audience, that I'd like to declare. And so I'm so happy and thrilled that I have had an expert evaluator to walk alongside. So most of my work has been around thinking about complex systems and public health issues, and particularly inequality. And I've always been really interested, and a lot of my work has been interested in thinking about sort of, what works in terms of addressing sort of systemic challenges. And so I guess that's where a lot of my sort of both interest and passion in this has come from, and probably affects some of the flavour of what we've done in the evaluation as well. So as Nan said, don't have a heap of time and I'm yabbering along already. And so I thought, I don't know the degree of knowledge of people who are in the audience. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about what Healthy Families New Zealand is, a little bit about how we've been evaluating it, and just a little bit of the findings and things. And hopefully that's enough to stir people to have questions that they might want to ask. And so hopefully we'll get a good, 20 minutes or 30 minutes of questions at the end. Anyway, So first, we've had over that 8 years, we've had a pretty stable evaluation team, and sort of across institutions as well, and those institutions have changed actually throughout the evaluation. So thank you to all these people. Now this is just briefly sort of how healthy families, and I don't know if the teams would describe them in this way, but how sort of the top end of healthy families describes itself. So bringing community leadership together, a united effort for better health in the places that we live, learn, work and play. And of course that leans into, all the evidence that we have, including the Commission on Social Determinants of Health, around how important place is for our health and health outcomes. So they also say the Healthy Families New Zealand approach focuses on addressing the underlying conditions that impact our health and well-being. In order to reduce the risk of preventable chronic disease, all of the Healthy Families New Zealand locations are connected through a common approach and principles to create a prevention movement. So currently there are 11 teams in 10 different geographic locations around New Zealand. Tenera, the Hamilton team was put together, I think, only a couple of years ago, but all the rest have been since the beginning of the initiative. And those teams are located in lead providers, so local organisations in their area. And at the moment, that's within iwi, within whānau order collectives, local government, regional sports trusts, and there's a Pacific-led social change organisation as well. Oh, and I meant to say, Nan, please, you're allowed to interject as well. Okay, good. Okay, so briefly, the history of the initiative, and there's lots I could say here, but I won't, and maybe things will come up. But anyway, it was commissioned by the Ministry of Health in 2014. It was modelled on this Australian systems change initiative called Healthy Together Victoria. The initiative, Healthy Families New Zealand, was refunded in 2018 and then again in 2022. And for most of that time, aside from the first couple of years, the evaluation has been funded alongside the initiative as well. Key features of Healthy Families New Zealand, and these were features that were sort of in the very initial stages, were that the plan was to develop the systems thinking and acting workforce, to create local strategic leadership groups, local prevention partnerships, and the role of the national team was sort of always meant to be, that was based at the Ministry of Health, was always meant to be seen as part of the initiative rather than only the contractor. The initiative has had sort of guiding principles, and again, these are from the very beginning. And I guess the sort of emphasis and prioritizing of these has changed a little bit over time. And so these were implementation at scale, collaboration for collective impact, equity, experimentation, adaptation, and leadership. Now this, so this is where the initiative's been carried out at the moment, and those are the different lead providers in each of the local areas where the teams are based. And it was this diversity that really influenced the design of and how we were, how we approached the evaluation. And I won't talk heaps about this. We've got a paper written about it as well. And again, you can ask questions, but we took a complexity approach to the evaluation. And so when you've got all this sort of, diversity of context and how you're looking at things which are clearly happening in context, the most appropriate approach was to do a comparative case approach to the evaluation, which is what we did, so that we could look at all the activities going on in those local areas, in their situation, but also have a way of looking across and seeing what was happening sort of in a more general sense. So this was, we had been trying to sort of communicate what the design of the evaluation is, and this was It's one stage what we came up with, but what this shows is that because the evaluation has been happening for 8 years, you know, we have these already 3 time points, and we will have a 4th time point in 2026. And so it gives you a picture sort of the longitudinal nature of the evaluation and how we've been able to look at each phase, look at the previous phases, you know, as to what's been happening, and to think more deeply, I guess, about things that have been happening over time. We came up with a bunch of questions which the Ministry of Health, you know, wanted to guide the evaluation. And so these focused on implementation, factors that are assisting with systems change, to what extent is health and wellbeing improving, to what extent is it making a difference to Māori and Pacific health and to equity, to what extent has the prevention system been strengthened. And in the last phase, we also did a value for money exercise. Actually, Mate, Iruzan Lopez and Jackie Cumming led the value for money, and they did a cost consequences exercise around the initiative. So the data sources that we've used, and which have changed a little bit over time, including their emphasis. The last phase, we introduced what we called outcome narratives, and that was in response to the teams really feeling that they wanted more of their voice in the evaluation in terms of the things that they were doing and the successes that they were having. And so alongside them, we developed a template to try and capture some of that, the local successes, and also the sort of the ways that teams were talking about those. We've continued to do key informant interviews, sort of locally in the areas with the teams as well as stakeholders. And we've also been interviewing the national level team members as well. We've done a stakeholder survey over the time. We've used the 6-monthly performance monitoring reports, financial data, especially in the value for money. And we've also been sort of monitoring by looking at sort of the big administrative data sets, which might be relevant to those local areas and to the goals of healthy families. We've got more to do on this. So we've been trying to also develop sort of a framework for thinking about system change. This is something that we're going to be putting a bit more effort into in this next round of evaluation as well. So at the beginning, I sort of shared with you sort of how the initiative sort of talked about itself, I guess. But I guess if we as the evaluators were thinking, okay, what are the teams doing? I'd say this is what we have been seeing. So the teams are building on what's already going on in communities. They're operating as a backbone organisation to support shared goals, particularly around health and wellbeing in their local areas. A lot of their work has been incentivising collaboration and collective action locally. They've been using and developing tools and methods to gather local insight, but also engage local people in local action. And they've been building and joining up and diversifying leadership for health as well. You know, seeing it, you know, making it easier for unlikely folks to be able to access decision makers and to be, you know, champions of health. And the teams have also been doing a huge lot of learning about systems change and also communicating that. So in this last phase, actually it was probably at the coming to the end of the phase before, the teams got hold of this framework, so the 6 conditions of systems change. So I'm pretty sure that many of you know Donella Meadows and all of her work around sort of hierarchies and levers of change. And so this framework here comes from that work, and it was the teams have found it just really, really useful in terms of how they're prioritizing methods and goals and things like that. So this has become a really useful tool for the teams as they've gone on. And just some pictures. And I always think, because that's you need a break from my voice. so seeing some nice pictures there of stuff that the teams have been up to. And so some of the local successes and areas of local success. So there's other things, but I guess these are the things which there's more of it happening across the teams. So spreading healthy settings and processes, like in workplaces, marae, schools, changing funding criteria, championing healthy government policy, especially locally, actually with local government. There's been a lot of that work, but also trying to advocate nationally. So around smoking, alcohol, food, water, urban design, green spaces. There's been more and more work looking at natural environments and practices around natural environments. There's been the teams have been really building up expertise around local communication capacity, to share stories, to share successes, to share local practices. They've been working to influence organisational relationships locally. And there's been a really big momentum around trying to create a better local food systems as well. That's been something which has been really prominent to all the priorities of the teams. So this is just basically saying, so one of the things right across the evaluation over the 8 years, we've seen that the way that Healthy Families New Zealand has been implemented is really strong, and it really fits with sort of the integrity of what the initiative was meant to be doing. And so we're still seeing that. We're still seeing that it's holding quite, even though there's been evolution in the initiative, it's still holding quite strongly to sort of its purpose and what it was meant to be doing. And just briefly, I'm not going to get into this for this talk, but the value for money or the cost consequences study showed that a very, very high value for money, but also made the point that the investment that's gone into healthy families is a real drop in the bucket in terms of the investment needed in prevention in communities around Aotearoa. And it was even interesting that it's even hard to find, how much is spent on prevention in the context of, quite a big health system budget too. So some of the sort of key things and the key issues that have come out of the evaluation. So there's been a really, and particularly actually in the last phase, there's been a really strong focus on Māori systems. There's been a high proportion, there is a high proportion of Māori and Pacifica workforce and leaders within the initiative as well. And there's been a lot of weaving of different types of knowledge together within the initiative and knowledge and practice as well. And, just even in these reports, and you'll see more of them, and something I think unanticipated too was just how much sharing there has been sort of across, these very, very diverse communities within the initiative. And I just like this quote because I think it says a lot. So we went through a bit of a process with Healthy Families, including now about why the emphasis on maramataka. because it didn't seem to fit naturally against what we were contracted for. But it's been the key. It's really captured the imagination and the heart of the community, and it grows people's cultural confidence and identity. And then they speak up and encourages people to have a voice about many things, including their water. I just like it, just links so many of the issues together, and, you know, and the sort of sophisticated and complex pathways, you know, to getting people to be able to act on issues which are important. As I said earlier, so local food systems is something which pretty much all the teams have been very active in that space. So they've been doing a lot of and sort of facilitating, collaborating, supporting a lot of sort of food projects around local kai collectors, Pātaka kai, food in schools, projects to regenerate soils and improve food cycles. So not only the projects though, and there's been all this sharing across, you know, all the Healthy Families locations, and bringing together all of that and trying to turn this into, you know, a movement to make really substantial change, you know, from that local perspective. And so this from a report which all the teams did, where they brought all their sort of lessons and practices together. This is just something which is written in the report. So our communities have the solutions to the food insecurity they're experiencing. Local movements are clearly linked to innovative outcomes and changes in the food system. And I know that that's something that the teams are currently still quite strongly engaged in as well. So activities of the teams have also focused on other significant public health challenges. And again, they've been efforts bringing these together so they can both be communicated and shared around smoking, around physical activity, around mental health and alcohol. And this idea of, you know, how you get these, you know, sort of these local movements which capture local voice. So as well as those topic areas, the teams have also been sharing what they've been learning in terms of their own practice. Something, you know, which has become so apparent across the initiative's lifetime is just how important local government is for health and well-being. And, you know, and where are the sort of levers and pathways to making sure that local government you know, acts with local health and well-being in mind, I guess. The way that Healthy Families New Zealand has been commissioned, and that's sort of quite responsive relationship with the Ministry of Health that it's had and for the contract holder, you know, is seen as something quite innovative. And so it was used as a case study recently to show different ways that you can sort of commission and invest within local communities. And the teams themselves have also been learning through the decade that it's been going about systems change. And there's been quite a lot of work, you know, sharing and communicating that both knowledge and the practices around how you create systems change as well. And so all of these reports you can look on the website of Healthy Families as well. They're all up there. Oh, sorry. Oh, there we go. So just a few, there's more and on these, but a few factors that we've found that have been contributing to systems change. So first is just that change is happening, you know, that stuff is going on. Those changes in those local communities are being done, you know, and I think that, you know, that might sound like, oh, well, of course, but actually I think a lot of policy doesn't result in actual change happening, you know, and so I think that that's a real strong, you know, a strong thing to keep in mind. Those sharing across the diverse communities, you know, I think sort of that building and strengthening of local voice and community voice, the very intentional and resourced collaboration and sort of leveraging of resources, that focus on joining up and diversifying leadership, learning about and bringing in better ways to engage locally, sort of more sophisticated, recognizing that relationships locally are sophisticated and require, sophisticated ways of dealing with them. And so lots of the methods that the teams have been using are that. It's developed a uniquely skilled and sought after workforce, which is of course a double-edged sword for the initiative, because it makes people, who are gaining these skills very attractive to other organisations. And a key that has kept the initiative evolving and learning has been that responsive policy and community relationship. So the last phase of the initiative, when I was asking the teams, what their relationship with the Ministry of Health was like, and all of them were very, very positive about it, saying that, it assisted them with their work. They trusted the relationship. They trusted they could talk about challenges in that relationship and just how important that was. And also, and I think that this is partly because the initiative, but also the evaluation has been going for such a decent amount of time, you begin to see the mindsets and paradigms that, have influence.
And just to add to that, Anna, it would be fair to say that the relationship with the ministry in the first couple of years was fairly traditional. In terms of the Healthy Families teams were an unknown entity, but over time, a relationship of trust, relationship that has allowed local teams to be flexible, right, has built on both sides. So, it wasn't like that at day one, but it certainly has emerged and been mutually reinforcing over time.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there's so much, isn't there, so much in this, and especially the overtime stuff. But I think that's correct. And I think that it was... But I think there was intention at the beginning, but I think the practice of it didn't sort of come into fruition till it had been tried, and so exactly, yeah. Thanks. So and thinking even a step back from the evaluation, it's in the data that we're getting, and thinking about those mindsets and paradigms, one of the things. So I think part of that paradigm shift is about what we value and therefore what we pay attention to. And I think that whole community systems space, in terms of so many of our wider systems, including the policy systems, we don't really value it or pay enough attention to it in all sorts of ways. So I think part of the paradigm shift is that shift to centering place-based communities, within the system context that they're within. And that's about recognizing that sophistication of local relationships, understanding better what we mean when we say scaling something, that actually we're talking about, relationships probably between different social groups. That acceptability from all sorts of folks around communities being able to hold and create expert knowledge themselves and being comfortable with that. The acceptability of systems thinking. That building of knowledge through practice, which I think, short-termism that we have in the policy system really doesn't help with. Understanding that relationship between scientific evidence and context, local context. So it's how does the big evidence we have of things relate to local context? How can it be used? I think that's a gap of value. And I think the pandemic had quite a influence as well on people really seeing the community action became really visible during the pandemic, and the necessity for that and dealing with the both the communication, the messages, and also the things that needed to be done to try and keep people safe. and in the literature at the moment, so there's they have the formal health system, there's quite a lot of systems thinking stuff going on, and also complex systems thinking. But there's this recognition that actually when we're talking about the determinants of health, you know, even the context within which health systems, you know, operate, we're sort of tiptoeing towards systems thinking in how we're thinking about addressing the determinants, which I think is a really hopeful thing. I think that tiptoeing is going to turn into a march, actually. Yeah, so, and I guess, and again, I don't know heaps about, I'm assuming many of you are evaluators. So I was thinking, you know, so what are some of the reflections about carrying out, you know, an evaluation like this? And I thought this might lead into the, so questions, but then I've got another couple of slides, but I will go through this and then we can go off that anyway. So, and then please hop in here as well. So I feel like we've been really learning along the way. Like I think even and I think it was you who introduced to me, Nan, the idea of an evaluand, like I think, you know, the thing that you're evaluating. And I think actually as evaluators, we have been learning what healthy families is. Like we certainly didn't know it in the same way that we now know it as well. You know, we began also, and also always the intention of the evaluation was to be, you know, theory informed. But again, I think alongside that learning, I feel like we've also been developing theory as well, you know, at that same time as we're learning what's been going on. Another thing which is about healthy families, but also about other work and research that I've done in communities around New Zealand through my career, is just actually how stable place-based communities are organisationally, and much more so than the policy system. And I think there's a lot in there that needs to be thought about, including in how what kind of data we hold, you know, in the long term about communities. Even though I was already a convert to qualitative research, I think that even more so, I think having this sort of qualitative longitudinal data has been really, really useful. And I think that one of the things that it really helps at the time, when you've got these different time points and you're looking at things as they evolve, is that picture of the wider context begins to emerge, which I think you can't see, you know, if it's a much shorter term, you know, look at whatever you're looking at. So I think that's been really interesting. And carry on, Nan.
Sorry, Anna. I think the first point that Anna notes is we've been learning along the way. So that's about two things. One, that we have time and we make time to reflect, but it also means that we've had permission or a willing client to be able to adapt as well, because it's if you can just learn that it's not working or not working as well as it was like, and you just have to continue to do the same thing. So you have to sometimes be brave and say, we'll give that another go, or we'll try something different. And so I think having both a team that reflects, as well as a client that lets you actually adapt and change. Change doesn't happen, and you know, like unless we ask for it, unless there's permission to change. Sorry, Anna. Cool.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. There's so much in here, isn't there? I mean, that's right. I mean, we couldn't have done the learning that we've done if there was a different kind of relationship with the funder as well, you know. And so that similar type of relationship with the funder that I think the teams have experienced have allowed us to be able to go in the directions that we've gone in as well. Yeah, and just my final one was that, you know, there are a lot of challenges actually to long-term evaluations like this. One, of course, is continuous funding. And, you know, so even the literature, when you look at sort of these, you know, big types of community initiatives and how they've been evaluated, one of the biggest challenges is that the evaluations fall over, you know, for various reasons, and that they don't have sort of continuity and consistency. And and so that's I could do another whole talk on the challenges of all of us keeping this going. There's all sorts of things institutional. I've been to 2 universities in the meantime. I'm sure Nan has had changes in circumstances, all the things which affect your ability to be supported to be able to continue something in a consistent way. So so that's another thing. Just have you got anything, because I've just got some concluding things, Nan, but do you have anything more on that before questions? And
no, I said, we've been intentional in thinking about what's working and not working, and we've been brave enough to say we need to change, and we've had a client that's given us permission to change. So I think, there's so much, right? We've been doing this for nearly 8 years, so I won't add any more to this.
Okay, okie doke. So just thank you to the Healthy Families workforce and all the evaluation participants, the ministry, national team, and also, of course, the evaluation team. Now, about a week and a half ago, we had this article published, which tries to summarise sort of some of the key lessons of the evaluation. So if you're interested, you can look at that. And there's a whole bunch of other reports and articles that we've produced over the time, and also, of course, the Healthy Families New Zealand website. So thank you, everybody. I will shush, I think, for a moment, and I'm not sure how long we've got for questions, and who am I handing over to?
Yeah, we've got 10 minutes for questions, so we can open up the floor.
We have a couple of questions in the chat already, if you'd like to look at those.
Okay. Oh, I can't. Just let me hop out of here. Sorry, does someone else want to have a look at them? I'm sorry, I can't get you.
One of the questions is, one of those ones we've struggled with, given the very small funding and given their small teams and the place-based, how are we dealing with, the extent to which Healthy Families is influence population health stats? And the second question is also, what does advocacy look like in Healthy Families locally and nationally? I might just pick the last one to start with. When I think, the thing that resonates with me is some of the work that's been done at the local level with local councils, and over the years there's been focus on, I've written down, why smoking, alcohol, water. And so they've done lots of advocacy at a local level of getting local council policies changed around smoking, around water in public venues, around lots of work just recently around food systems, lots of advocacy around smoking. So I think that's just one slice, and that's just one slice that's focusing on, obviously, local government, but there's also all of the other work that they do in a community about sharing mindsets, ways of working, and then here's our perennial one, Anna. How are we dealing with or not dealing with the extent that Healthy Families is influencing population health stats?
Oh, yeah. So just before we deal with that perennial one, can I just go back to the advocacy one?
Yeah.
Just briefly, because I think that this, can't do something with 8 years without deeply reflecting on some things. And, I think that one of the things that Healthy Families is showing is that there might be a different way for advocacy kind of to be cast that doesn't put all the onus on sort of little not well-funded organizations trying to make the case for things, that we can somehow integrate local advocacy into our systems, which is that idea of how you centre them. So I guess that was aspirational. Yeah. And so we've struggled, right, with the population data. So
Been up front, Anna. I think we've been upfront, right? And we haven't really, what we've done is tracked population data, national health stats. We haven't actually made an argument about attribution or even contribution, because the initiatives are wide and varied. They're very small. Why we think one small initiative, which is amazing in a community of, 3,000, is going to change local and national health stats is it's just ludicrous. So what we've done is
good.
Yeah. I'll throw to you now, Anna.
And actually what the challenge is, because we know that's an absolute fact, right? It just doesn't make sense. I mean, so the things like the New Zealand Health Survey and before school checks that we have been looking at, that we've been able to look at sort of those geographic areas of the initiatives, tell you some interesting stuff about what's going on, but it tells you nothing about Healthy Families New Zealand. And that's for all sorts of reasons. And they're really limited too. There's been changes and questions over time. There's all sorts of problems. And so what you said, Nan's, absolutely correct. And actually the challenge that we have is communicating that to people, because people just don't believe it, even though it's true. And so that's quite the tough thing, trying to say, well, yeah, it's just not the appropriate kind of data to look at for something like this.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think you're right, Anna. It's we can't in a meaningful or very strong way make a link to changes in national health stats. And also there's a whole lot of other stuff going on. We know all of the arguments, so we've tried not to play that game. What we've done instead is we've looked to, through the outcome narratives and other things, we look to teams to share their successes. So we're giving on the ground what's happening in local communities, what are the changes they're seeing, what's changes and what's contributing, which is way more meaningful to the teams, and actually it's just a more accurate reflection of what's happening on the ground.
Yeah.
We've got another question, which is...
Sorry, and just one more thing on that. Even though we're ignoring it, we have dealt with that. Like if you read our papers, we have dealt with that, tried to deal with that in a rigorous way in the papers that we've written. Yeah, and actually one thing that is interesting, actually, if you do, when we looked at the data, showing that across the whole of New Zealand, unmet need in primary care is increasing and mental health challenges are increasing as well. So just for unrelated to Healthy Families.
Another question from Kitty Parata. I wondered, given so many conditions of this project, multiple communities and diversity amongst each of these, length of engagement, etc., were there difficulties in keeping communities and leaders engaged, given their multiple responsibilities with other initiatives? And did you have great engagement across all case studies, and any tips on this? So the first question is, what were the challenges and the difficulties of keeping communities and leaders engaged, given their multiple responsibilities?
Well, we haven't been doing that, have we? I mean, no. So the teams themselves, and I guess the relationships, with their communities and with the funder, it's been a highly motivated initiative, probably, is what I would already say. Us as the evaluation team, it's been a little bit tricky, because when I said communities are stable, academics are quite stable as well, actually. And, so there's been lots of change in individuals, throughout that decade that the initiative has been there. And so, as evaluators, we've had to, have relationships with people who have changed at all sorts of different times, including the policy situation as well as those in communities. But what's been really interesting, I think, with Healthy Families is they really have had a way of sort of retaining and building on the knowledge that they have been creating as well, so that when nowadays when new people come in, there's all sorts of sort of institutional knowledge around the initiative, which makes it easier to be picked up and easier to be to work effectively, I guess.
One of the things that comes to mind for me, particularly in the first and second round, was that part of the structure of Healthy Families was to have a strategic leadership group in each community. And over time that phased out. So some kept their strategic leadership group for all the reasons we know. These are very busy people. So some kept the strategic leadership group, some adapted the membership, some went to different ways of communicating, you know, whether it was face-to-face or online. Sometimes they disappeared because actually already the people involved were the strategic leadership group. So there was this notion of having strategic leadership, local strategic leadership. But in the end, it took on, it adapted responding to the context and structure, because actually often many of the stakeholders and people were the leaders. And so that kind of, I don't know if it's phased out, it just has morphed into something that's much more emergent from the community. And did you have any good engagement across case studies? Again, what we did there is they gave us, I mean, we did some case study, but we've got all of these sites, they're giving us outcome narratives, they're publishing on their own websites. Again, that's one of the
we've had amazing engagement from the teams, actually. So privileged for that aspect. Yeah.
And they have it's part
which
of
isn't anything that we've done.
Yeah. There's a little bit that we've done,
okay.
From what they say. But one of the things that the structure of Healthy Families facilitates is they have someone who's responsible for communication, outreach, those kind of, you know, it's a formal role. And so they are, sharing successes, learning, insights, advocacy as part of their day-to-day business. And so they're sharing, you know, good news stories, success stories, but also challenges. So again, that in the end gives us a very deep pool of content to draw from, and then engage with them over different, you know, a different korero that they've shared. I'm quite interested to, just watching our time. Oh yeah, we probably can do one, maybe two. I'm quite interested to hear any insights you have for working with Pacific communities. What's worked, not worked, latest research. I don't know that we have any answers, because remember the Healthy Families teams work with the communities. We largely engage with the teams, and I don't know that there's, looking at what they're doing, surprise, surprise, they're Pacific led. They have staff with multiple community and cultural and language connections. My recall of some of the work in South Africa and South Auckland is that they engage with Pacific leaders and communities and activities that we know through church, through schools, but I don't think we can comment any more deeply than to, you know, to state the obvious, which we've seen come through in the work of the teams. I don't know if you want to add anything, Anna.
Nope, that sounds right. Oh, can't hear you, Nan. Is there any other questions? Because is that all that we exhausted the chat questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any other ones from the floor?
I think that's that. Oh, that's just feedback. Fantastic. Nan and Anna, thank you so much for sharing your insightful and meaningful work with us. We really see the impact of your work, and we value your efforts and contributions to building healthy families in New Zealand. So malo albito for joining us. Just a few things before we finish up and wrap up. We've got our conference happening here in Auckland at the Novotel Ellerslie on in November the 4th to 7, 2024. And this year's theme is the mana enhancing role of evaluators. And so our early bird tickets will be coming out end of this month. So if you want more details, that will be found on the NZIA website. Other than that, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. Have a lovely day. Malo albito.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your time.